like Brosius.
We are here today with Eric Brosius, who works at Harmonix and has for the last 5 years.
About 5 years, that's right.
And he's here today to talk to us about his work at Looking Glass, and we'll just go through kind of a narrative of that and
Sure.
Kind of segue maybe into some of how that work relates to or doesn't relate to just at your current job.
Sure, sounds good.
Cool. What was? I guess we could just start with a little bit of your background before Looking Glass and kind of how you got into the company. And
Sure. I'm a musician first, really, and I wasn't really. I didn't study for a game design or game, or audio or anything like that. And I kind of stumbled into making video games because I was in a band with another guy who I work with now, Greg LoPiccolo. We were in a band in the 80s called Tribe, and we were kind of popular around here, and we never really did much outside of the New England area. But some of the people who worked at Looking Glass were fans of the band. They used to come see us, and then they had a new project that they needed music for, so they had two of them, and they asked Greg, my bandmate, to do music for one of them, and they asked me and my wife Terry to do music for the other one. So Greg did music for the first System Shock game, and I and my wife Terry worked on music for another game they were doing called Terra Nova Strike Force Centauri, which was an old,
robot
big shooter,
kind of,
3D, outdoor thing. It was actually a really good game. But, and then after a while, our band, kind of broke up, and I started, we started doing more, hired as a freelance kind of audio guy to help do stuff, and after a while, just kind of became full-time person.
Kind of migrated
into it.
Yeah.
That's right.
Cool. So you started working just kind of part-time while you were still in the band on, and it was Terra Nova.
That's right. Yeah.
First.
Mm-hmm.
Could you describe a bit of your experience of, did you play video games before that, or was it something that you didn't know much about? Did you know a little bit about it, or was it like this totally different world that you were coming into?
I knew a little bit about it. When I grew up, I played like arcade games a lot, and I had had an Atari and things like that. But I wasn't a giant giant gamer at that point.
And you weren't into PC games, which is what the games you were working on were.
Right. I mean, I had played a couple. I had played like Marathon was, the Bungie game was one of my favorite, games early on. But not a heavy gamer, didn't devote that many hours to it, And I didn't really, so it was really kind of a learning experience. I came in kind of, green from the whole thing, especially the sound design,
So how did you approach, I guess, did you feel like you were in over your head, or were you just like, oh, hey, it's sound design, I guess I'll just kind of learn a bit about games, or did you just kind of were very intuitive about it?
Well, the first thing I was asked to do was really just music, and just to write some music based on, a design doc, right? Okay, these are the kind of characters we have. This is the plot that's going to be. Here's all the worlds that we have, so we need a piece of music for this world and that world and that world. And so it was really just based on more oh, well, I've seen movies that are, have similar vibes, so let me just try to do something like that. I also got to say that the music that we did was not that successful, and I think because one of the things I didn't really know, I think about, back then we were really dealing with, really crappy sound cards and a lot of FM synthesis. So I made the stupid mistake of trying to do an expansive orchestral thing that when you crushed it down to an FM card just sounded ridiculous a little bit. So where Greg was a lot smarter than when he did System Shock, he did an electronic score, right? Which when you translate it down to the beeps and bloops of a FM synthesis actually work really well, so it translated really well. And the work we did, we tried hard. We got it to sound good on if you had an All-32, the Sound Blaster All-32.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Because we put our own custom samples in, we actually got it to sound really good there. But if you had other cards, it just did not sound that awesome.
Do you remember what some of those cards were? Because I'm really fascinated. Because I remember having PC games at that time, and I think I had a Sound Blaster 16 for a while before I got the All-32. And I remember there was the Roland, and then there was the Gravis Ultrasound.
Yeah, all of those.
Do you even remember that stuff?
I remember some of that stuff. I mean, some of the stuff was FM, based. So we had to sit there tweaking, doing FM synthesis, which was it's a pain, right? I didn't know So you're just basically trying to, let me see if I can get a string sound by, doing these modules and putting them together, and it was hard. And even on the nicer sound cards that were wavetable-based sound cards, we were, wasn't really smart enough to know, we tried to do custom things. I'm going to play these really cool piano notes really down low and see how they sound. And well, they sounded terrible, because they only did a couple samples across the whole spectrum. Now on the All-32, that was one of the first cards that you could do your own sample banks. So I was able to do a couple. Well, if I want those low piano samples, I'll make my own, and you can upload them to the card and some guitar samples and stuff which is why we were able to get it to sound pretty good there. But it was just not being aware of the whole industry and the whole thing, that it just the music suffered pretty badly when you played it on other cards.
And you're talking about Terra Nova specifically.
Yeah, that one. Yeah.
So Terra Nova. So you did have the All-32 version with your custom samples and everything for Terra Nova, and you're saying that one was kind of less.
I was pretty happy with it.
I was pretty happy
good.
with that one. Okay.
But it was less successful on other cards, and I think if I was wiser, I would have written a score that was closer to the technology we had. Trying to do something that was big and expansive on what we had was a dumb idea.
Well, but I can see how you would take that route as opposed to what Greg did with System Shock. Mm-hmm. System Shock was a cyberpunk, and Terra Nova was science fiction, but it was kind of space opera too. So I can imagine how you
absolutely
had thought of orchestral.
And my first instincts were to do that, but I think it was my inexperience in the field that that would have been anyone's maybe first instinct. Oh,
sure.
I'll do this big thing, and in practice, it wasn't quite ready. There was no streaming audio at that time. It was this was before so I remember soon after that not too much. Well, Mech Warrior came out or something, and that was where they had actually streaming WAV files, so you could actually do stuff at home and record it, and it'll just play back these nice lush sounding WAV files. Well, we didn't have that, and they were not lush.
So you approached it like film scoring, it seems like.
Well, I tried to,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, and was it mostly the missions? You just kind of had one track. Was it dynamic at all? Or
it was dynamic. It was. They had different levels of. We had for each. So they had 4 basic planets in the thing, and each one of them had a set of a score. So, and it was all done in MIDI, right? Because we were playing back then, and each one had like they do now. They had a 2-minute piece that was I'm just exploring. Then I had someone's on my radar. There's some tension, and then you had your combat piece, and then. And so we did the basic things when this game you're running around on a planet, exploring, and then finally someone comes on your radar or something in the distance, and then you in the battle. So we had this kind of exploring piece that was supposed to evoke the mood of the planet or something, and then when the tension level would rise, we'd pretty much immediately jump to the next section. It was all done in MIDI, so we could kind of jump on the beat, right? We put markers in the MIDI file to show, okay, you wait to the next beat or wait to the next measure.
So it wouldn't cut awkwardly.
So it wouldn't cut, Yeah. And then we'd have a timeout. If you entered the second intensity phase and nothing happened for a while after 20 seconds or whatever, then we would transition back to the first piece. And the way we actually did the transition, because nowadays you would maybe I'll do a crossfade between my tension music and my kind of normal music. Well, I actually wrote MIDI files that I basically wrote 2 MIDI files and played and combined the MIDI files from both pieces and then crossfade them in MIDI to make them go, and did kind of the math to figure out what's the tempo difference between the first one and the second one, and so that we'd actually in MIDI would do this kind of weird crossfade between
And was that something you hadn't thought about doing before, just for the first time because it was interactive? It was just kind of wow, I guess I have to figure out how this works.
And the thing we knew pretty much right away that if you're increasing in intensity, you can make your jumps quick, right? And almost you can hard cut them almost because you want the pow of being able to hold. But when the intensity is ramping back down, that is as a player becoming less excited and starting to calm down, you want the music to do it over time. So when we were ramping down to at that down level, I would write, a transition that was maybe 30 or 40 seconds long that would kind of combine the two pieces, both harmonically and tempo-wise and everything, so that you'd kind of get this. It's kind of like a MIDI version of crossfading the audio.
Now, was it music only on Terra Nova, or was there other kind of sound design, or was it mostly just music?
I started out doing music, but I ended up doing the rest of the sound design also.
Okay. So did you do like voice direction?
And there was voices and sound effects and weapon sounds and footsteps and
all that. The whole sound design,
all the kind of stuff,
for the game.
Yeah, I mean, I think at that point, I think Greg was done with System Shock or close to it, so he kind of helped me get set up with like the voice recording, the part of it, and things like that. But,
yeah, because when we interviewed him, I remember he said that he moved over to being kind of like the AV guy.
Yeah, he was like the head of the AV department.
Yeah.
And I was the lead on the Terra Nova project then, So as I actually became more transitioned from just doing the music to, okay, now I'm going to actually be the lead on the thing, then I kind of took over whatever they had started with the sound design stuff. So
cool. So it sounds like Terra Nova was your big kind of like trial by fire experience. And so what was the next one? Was it?
Let's see. After that,
would it have been Thief or?
No, I think we did. I can't remember. Honestly, I think we did. They did a couple flight simulators.
Flight Unlimited.
Yeah,
and there was
I think
of those.
Three of them. I think I did. I worked on like the third one because I think the first two were kind of before my time right around there. And then we did a golfing game, if you can believe it. We did a British Open Championship golf, which.
And you did music for that?
I did everything for that. Yeah.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
So what was that like going from Terra Nova to golf?
That was actually pretty cool because some of it was kind of the same. I mean, by that, in the fact that. So I listen to music like that you hear like on ABC Wide World of Sports, or at the Olympics, or other stuff that I thought was kind of like that, like Aaron Copland or something like that. So I was trying to do just music that was like, it was kind of sporty, like TV Saturday afternoon, ABC Wide World of Sports, and that also had the kind of I would like try to do something that felt like it was like British and ancient because the whole thing about golf is like, well, it's St. Andrews and we're doing the whole thing. So I would like throw in bagpipes or something stupid like that. So, but it was fun. It was fun because we got to do at that point we could do some streaming WAV files, although they were all mono. So all the music in that was kind of mono streaming WAV files.
Do you know what year that would have been, or roughly, or?
Oh God, no.
96, 97 maybe.
It could have been something like that. 96.
I'm just thinking of I think Terra Nova is 96 and Thief is 98.
Yeah, so 97 is a good bet.
I would think.
But it was fun. No, that was I was pretty happy with the way the music came out with
cool.
Like that.
Cool. Was that was that a smaller project or didn't take as long, or is that not your memory of it?
It seemed to be it was smaller. It was less expansive than Terra Nova. They had a lot of VO, and that was the big thing. And because they had a kind of this AI where every time you hit the golf ball, they had announcers going, and they would say, "Oh, well, I could tell that he sliced it to the left, and he's like 400. He's still 200 yards from the hole, and maybe he'll use a 5-iron." And they would cut up all these like snippets of audio. And the announcer would basically put together what he was going to say, just like on TV, based on that.
So, did you have to figure out how to, like, kind of algorithmically make that work? Like, who was saying what when, and like what would make sense? What voice cut to say next?
That had to be done, but that wasn't by me. That was one of the lead designers of the game. His baby. That was kind of his. That was what he wanted to do. He wanted to make a game it felt like you were watching golf on TV, and so he really did all the work. And we did all the recording and all of the editing and that kind of stuff. But he actually did all the design, so can't take credit for that.
Was it difficult to do the recording for something that was so cut up and have all these like crisscrossing ways it could be fit together, but still sound natural, like somebody's just commenting? Like, was that hard as a recording, kind of directing actors kind of process?
Yeah, well, we got like good people. We had two guys. One guy who I didn't know who it was, and the other guy was like the actual Wide War Sports guy. What's his name? I forgot his name. But Jim, was it his name? I forgot. But
Abe would know. He's a sports guy.
I'm trying to think. I can't remember. Is it the actual one of the golf commentators?
Yeah, the actual guy, Jim McKay or whatever his name. I don't know who it is, but so he would, and so I think the trick was to record them kind of quickly. Like there was like it was all kind of a lot of one takes and stuff like that, and we had like at that time some kind of like voiceover software where you could just kind of didn't have to keep on typing file names. You just hit go and it would like assign a new take, a new file name. So I think a lot of it was like just kind of doing them quickly so that you don't have time to try to. There was no like you're not acting the parts. He was just like speaking. So it kind of made it kind of easy. And then we would edit things together, and then we'd bring them back in if like we couldn't
figure out how to connect them.
But once you figured out, when you're saying the numbers, you have to do it with this inflection. Then you could say all the numbers, and they would, and as long as they're kind of the same, you would, kind of do it.
Do you remember what software you were using to do the dialogue editing? Because I was doing a lot of dialogue editing for TV in 2008, and it was tedious. And so I imagine in 1997, it was. Probably it was tedious then.
Well,
more so.
This was not something that would. What it would do, I forgot what it was called actually, but it was something where you just like once you'd like whatever import your text file, your script basically with your file names. Every time you hit enter, it would create a new file with that file name, and then and say and whatever, and you're done. And so you can just keep on. That's good. Okay, so you can kind of do that. So you end up with a million. They're not, tightly edited, but you have a million files that are all named correctly, which kind of helps.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, the reason I asked about that is because I know that in sports games now, that's become like its own, not very widely recognized art. I think to put all those things together, because if you play a modern sports game, that's become very advanced. The making that not sound cut together when it obviously is.
Right.
And it's just interesting to me that you were dealing with that at an early time. I mean,
right.
Was it your sense that not a lot of other people were doing stuff like that at the time, or were you just you didn't know? Or?
I actually didn't really know. I mean, I don't recall a lot of games with a lot of continuous interactive voice stuff like that. They were all pre-recorded things that were story based, as far as I knew. But but I wasn't really.
It was also relatively the early days of recorded audio in games, period, right? Because it was like CDs were still sort of new in like 96, 97.
No, the first System Shock game came on like 7 floppy disks because you could get it without any of the voiceovers. Yeah. They're all text files. And then they also released it on a CD where you could finally get the voiceovers.
Yeah. So would Thief have been sort of like after the golf game? Probably?
What I should have done is actually go look at the years before this interview, because I don't actually remember.
No, that's fine.
I think so. Yeah, Thief was a larger game,
But you can't remember anything in between.
No, I think I did so a little bit on one of the flight games. That game, I think Thief would have been the next one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So there was like a few things in there, like the flight game and the golf game.
I mean, I did like a couple. One of the first things I did when I got there was I did a couple like sound effects for Descent. Remember that game?
Oh yeah.
And that didn't work on the game, but it was basically like they needed someone to do some effects, and they sent over a list of like 100 sound effects, and we just did them and like threw them over the fence. Just because that's what. So it's not even like working on the game at all. We didn't have builds of the game or nothing. They were just hey. Because back in those days, not a lot of studios had dedicated sound designers. It was like programmers making sounds, or they'd have their buddy go out and do it. And
that's actually really interesting. So, but Looking Glass did.
Yeah,
and that strikes me as very significant because the company, at least from what I can tell, seemed to have a bit of a culture of sound being more important, and having people like yourself or like Greg, who were musicians, working at the company. And when you look at something like Thief, of course, sound being so central to the gameplay in ways that even in stealth games now, it's not even quite as much, I think. And even going back to stuff like System Shock with the importance of audio and the storytelling and stuff, it seems to me there's something not coincidental about the fact that you have Looking Glass that has such an emphasis on sound, that has dedicated audio people, and then some of you go off to companies like Harmonix, and that's kind of interesting to me, that legacy.
I think early on, it used to be that, first most companies were small, right? So they had some artists and they had programmers and a designer or two and stuff like that. But very few had sound people that were on staff, and they would either contract out the sounds. And so even when you did that, they would do like kind of what I did for Descent. You get this list, they'd do some sounds, they mail them to you. The programmer, whoever, would incorporate them into the game, and that was kind of the model for quite a long time. And I think one of the best things, I think one of the ways that Looking Glass was fairly forward thinking is that they brought people in house so that you can kind of like live with the game and absorb the game and all that kind of stuff. And then they kind of quickly took the step to put a lot of the integration abilities into non-coders' hands. So in Thief we had
the tool set lets you do all that stuff.
Exactly, because like I didn't know how to code. So in Terra Nova, I remember like taking stuff, have to walk over to the programmer I was working with, and okay, I'll do this. Oh, don't play it that. It had no control over volume or panning or any of that kind of stuff. So it's like, put this in, and this is how I imagine it. And you have this big conversation, and that's that worked. If the guy's good and it works okay, it worked. But it
also takes a lot of time.
It's a lot of time, and sometimes you don't have a dedicated programmer to you. So he's like, okay, but I'm working on UI stuff, so I'm going to get to it when I get to it. And so the turnaround between trying to get stuff that you're working on is long, weeks sometimes, and in Thief we developed a whole kind of just text file based editing system where the engine would basically, anytime anything happened in the game, it would spit out an event to the, which happens a lot, right? Nowadays, this is what everything, but it would just spit out something to the audio engine, and then we could basically just kind of make up our own names for tags. I could tag any item with something like this. So you could, once they kind of did that, I could go in and like add all the footstep sounds myself. I could go in and add all the gunshot sounds, or if I wanted to do something different, well, I wonder if I can, every time this thing appears, because every time an object was drawn, they would send a create vent, right, to the sound system, and I could choose whether I wanted to hook something up to it, and there was just a giant database of it would just look up an event and a series of tags, and if something matched, it would play a sound. So
you got to, in some sense, do what a designer or a programmer would have normally done in terms of. But it sounds like that you had more authorial control over what was going on with the sound of the game.
Yeah, you would and also choose. I think that we're going to play a sound here. I think we're not going to play a sound here. So. So for all the in-game events, yes, because they had this great tool that was kind of open-ended. And once in a while there was something that couldn't be handled, and you have to go talk to someone. This is a special case thing, At the same time, we were doing stuff like learning how to use the level editor, so that for two reasons. One, so we could actually open up we would check out the level that an artist was working on, and I would be dropping, points, sound objects, and all this kind of stuff, so you can kind of really do all the hookup of like, okay, when you walk through the store, this is what happens, and you cross the room, it's over here, and these objects are radiating this kind of sound and this kind of stuff. So you could do all of the ambient and music in the game. We could just do ourselves without any programmer help. And I also did a lot of stuff like making test levels. Like I would build myself a room that was like 20 foot by 20 foot with all the textures that the game has, or all the styles. Like, here's the gravel, and here's the sand, and here's the grass, and here's the rock, and here's the marble, and then I could bring crates in there, and I could, after we hook up sounds for physics, I'd throw them around and test them, And
it sounds like a virtual Foley studio or something.
Yeah, or a way to test it right in game before I actually wanted to add these things I could try, and and we could kind of because it was a lot of the stuff was text-based, we didn't have to rebuild the entire game to test something new. I could just let me tweak the values on this text file, and then re-import the file, and then run the game again. Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's better,
Yeah, that strikes me as really interesting, because I know that when we were talking to Greg, it's really, he was the lead on Thief, correct? Or eventually?
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Eventually.
At that time, I think he was not the audio department lead, but he was actually the project lead.
Yeah. Well, it's significant to me that you have a game where sound is so important, and the person in charge is a guy who's a musician.
Exactly.
So, I'm interested in I guess maybe some examples of stuff in the game that maybe you've remembered or you thought worked particularly well, or. or I don't know, or I don't know if that's a useful way to construct a question.
Well, I think that I mean, I'm not really that enamored or not enamored with particular sound effects or something like that because I think one thing I learned during this process is that almost anything can work as long as it's like placed properly in the level, and like it's easier to make a bad sound effect sound good by using it correctly, and that you can kind of do where it's if you have a great sound effect that's used improperly, that makes that sound effect sound really bad.
Can you think of an example of like a bad sound effect?
Oh, there's a lot of bad sound effects in Thief, but I thought as a whole, I was fairly happy with as a sonic texture for the whole game. I was pretty happy. I mean, we did a lot of things with just really short loops because again, in Thief we had no streaming audio of any kind either in that first game, so. Everything was really done with 5-second loops or 8-second loops, and sometimes if I needed a long one, like we did, the longest one in the game I think is there's a level called the Horn of Quintus where it's like you travel through these catacombs and you're trying to follow this sound that the
sound of the horn, right? It's kind of echoing in the caverns, right. And you're following it.
And so we needed something that was like going to play the entire level and not drive you totally crazy,
By repeating too much.
By repeating too much, right? So that was like the longest one, and that's maybe a 20-second sample, and it's probably 8-bit, 11K. It's really, it's really crappy sounding.
I remember it being kind of haunting.
Well, I mean,
but that's good.
That's good. I mean, because that was something I was kind of worried about. And the cool thing about the engine, the way the engine we had, Dromed, right, was the name of the engine back there. They had very good sound propagation, which means that they could place this thing, 5,000 yards over here, and you do the radiuses. If the level was built correctly and the stuff was right, the sound would actually travel, snake through the things, and you could hear it with kind of at the proper volume and kind of coming from the proper direction, and it would we didn't have any like damping or anything, but based on texture or anything, but it would just basically all portal based. So if that door over there, if that's a door and the sound's over on the opposite direction, you would hear the sound coming through the door instead of through the wall and things like that. So that was really cool, and I thought it worked actually quite well.
I imagine some of the Thief fan community, which is, I don't know how familiar you are with them, but they're ample. They seem to be with all their levels and...
Yeah, they make their own custom stuff, and some of those are quite good. I played a couple of them early on.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they still...
Really awesome.
What year is it? 2011? They still use Dromed now.
It's amazing.
And they've, upgraded it with all this texture stuff, and, I mean, they've done, some of them are really elaborate. They've hired voice actors, and it's just...
Yeah, some of them are really good and really scary. And, what's cool is that most of them, they really kind of get the whole Thief vibe, and they're not looking. Most of them are not looking to turn into something else. They're just trying to
the tone and the atmosphere.
Yeah, the whole visually and sonically everything. They're trying to just keep it going further, rather than try to change things. It's kind of neat.
No, that is interesting. So when you were, I'm a little bit interested too in the, I guess, the kind of artistic direction for the game, and from a sound point of view, do you feel like there were kind of other people leading that direction, and you were just kind of following it and trying to do justice to their concept, or did you have a strong concept yourself of what that sound was, or were you really following the visuals of the writing, or et cetera, et cetera?
There wasn't really a strong concept other than the things we were keenly aware of were that this is going to be the first game, the first kind of stealth game that was really going to rely on audio cues, and so we put some kind of stakes in the ground. We didn't want a typical music soundtrack, one that because in a lot of games, in most games, you have you have a sound effect bed and an ambient bed and everything. And then you have a music soundtrack that kind of goes on top, and like a score. And so we kind of didn't want that. because we wanted to make sure there was enough space in the game so that you could kind of hear what's going on. That being said, I also wanted to make sure that every inch of the game had audio in it, and there wasn't any kind of silence. So, and I think I learned one of the lessons that I think is one of the most valuable lessons to me is that kind of a less is more type of thing, because a lot of the like the ambience in the game, they might just be like a 4-second loop that drone that just is kind of going for a while, and nothing else might happen for a little while, and it sounds really dull if you kind of think of it that way. But in the game, I sort of found that it kind of almost like hypnotized you and kind of sucked you into what you were doing and made you very aware because of the simplicity of what you were hearing, very aware of stuff around you. So, which worked in your advantage for like listening for your guards' footsteps or your enemies, and also anytime we added a new piece with just a hint of music, you'd really
notice the music.
You notice it,
yeah.
And I think that people I've heard comments, from people talking about the music as if there's like some big score, and I'm like, what are you talking about? There's nothing.
There's
it
like
goes
two
like
or
this
three
for a while,
pieces of
and then you
music.
get this one note, and it's almost like people use their imagination, because you've kind of like stripped away everything down to something that's really simple. So, so that part I was really interested in, and as I was like actually going and trying to put sounds in levels and trying to play through them and see how things go, I think I quickly learned that this is going to work for this game, where we can just try to keep it simple and hypnotic, and like we didn't really try to make it scary, or didn't try to make it dramatic or whatever.
It is scary. But
I think it's scary too.
But that wasn't the conscious.
It wasn't really a goal.
Yeah.
But we wanted to make it. We knew that we had to make it really immersive, and I think it ended up working by having kind of simple sounds that almost kind of lulled you into this like hypnotic state. You kind of like started really paying attention to your surroundings, both visually and orally, and I think that it's one of the main reasons that the game works sonically.
That is a really good explanation of something that I was trying to articulate in my head earlier for a question, but I think that is, now that I think about it, yes, that is really interesting, because I remember when you talk about this ambient sound, it's really striking ambient sound, right? It's not like the kind of ambient sound I feel you hear in a lot of games, which is almost unnoticeable. It's just something so you don't have silence, but this, like the sound of being in, I think, like in the first level, you come in through the sewers, the instant you get to the first floor, because you walk through a door and suddenly the whole ambient soundscape is different, and I think you're right. It does create that experience of it. It makes you suddenly stop and think, "Whoa, what's in here?"
Right,
and then you start listening for what else you might be hearing aside from the ambience.
And because we didn't have a kind of proper musical score, we took liberties with the ambience. Like the ambience are sometimes like realistic things. Oh, there's crickets, and there's wind, and there's like leaves rustling. There's a lot of that, but there's also just like, I'm walking around inside, and there's this weird drone going.
No, exactly.
And
yes,
that's not really a realistic thing. That was kind of the music, but functioning like the ambient. So we really were blurring that line, trying to consciously blur that line between ambient sound and music, so that they kind of became the same thing.
Because it is ambient sound, but you use it like music.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. And I have a very strong memory of downloading the demo back when it was just called the Dark Project, I think, before it was even called Thief. And I remember it's kind of funny because Thief is famous for, it's kind of like big emergent levels and nonlinear and all that kind of stuff. But the cutscenes are great. I mean, it has these really focused, like really wonderful cutscenes that just like completely nail the feeling, right? It just like sets you up for the feeling and the atmosphere that then the levels kind of deliver on.
I think that's true, and I think that I'm glad to have played a part of that, but I think a lot of that is the visual design and they had these really cool quotes, in the front. They would have these like prophecy type of quotes, and they were all pretty cleverly written. They were really, smart. And then the art was kind of simple, but
oh no, it's
pretty
wonderful.
Awesome. We knew we wanted to have this kind of, they had the whole kind of like the term you hear a lot, steampunk kind of thing, right? Which it's like old fashioned. but heavy machinery, stuff like that. So immediately, we wanted to have some sort of industrial type of elements, but we knew that we're not going to have kind of industrial music in the game, so. And I think we had debates about this. I think there were people on the other side who were like, this doesn't fit the game at all. This kind of like, louder,
The final piece you're talking about that's actually in the game. There was some
the
debate
final,
about that.
final, guitar feedback and fuzzy. That doesn't seem to, with the larger beat and stuff like, doesn't really seem to fit. And there was some, it was kind of polarizing, because it was not in character. In fact, like we'd always have this whenever we would do a trailer or something to try to advertise the game, we would sometimes use similar type of, kind of more aggressive music. And then we'd have to say, well, this doesn't really, kind of tell you what the game's about because the rest of the thing is kind of like at a pace that's slower and more deliberate. So, but,
That's a really interesting dichotomy to me, though. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having tonal variation, right, in the game. It's like the game gives you this like awesome advertisement for itself, and then it kind of gives you this world in which you sort of have to live up to that music. You have to somehow create that sense of coolness for yourself just through how you behave in the game.
And we would try to use like I would also try to use like some of the elements from that intro in other places in the game. Like there's some levels where I would like cut up a bunch of guitar feedback that I had used in the level into small pieces, and they would kind of play as like ambient sounds, the same way you might do a wind loop, but they would just be like these things that would kind of crossfade, and or there's some kind of like bell tree sound that's kind of like a shaky, ritualistic kind of sound. I remember using that in other places. So as much as possible, I mean, I was a big believer in like reusing stuff. If I had something that I used over here, what can I do over here and play it backwards, or pitch it down 6 steps, or make it stereo and play the left side backward? Because I think that it's just an economy of resources,
Sure.
and B, I think that it helps stitch these kind of disparate things together in some subconscious way.
Yeah, I was about to actually say subconscious because it does give you a kind of a subconscious continuity between something on the surface which might not seem related, which is that kind of hard intro music, and then the kind of ambient sound design of the game.
An interesting thing that kind of happened to me as we were talking about like spareness and kind of like lulling you in, hypnotizing you, I think that in the later Thief games, like I did the second one and the third Thief game also, and in both of those we had
the third, which was not Looking Glass.
No, the third one was done right.
So, was that Ironstorm?
Ironstorm, right?
Yeah.
But I did that one also, and by that time we could stream stuff. So a lot of the pieces were kind of 2-minute, still the same thing. Like you try to blur ambient and music and stuff like that. But there's something about them being like larger loops that were more kind of thoughtfully put together. That was nice in a way, but also I think took away in a way and didn't give me the same quite that I didn't think they lulled the player into the game as effectively as the first one.
I think that's really interesting because I'm thinking about modern sound design approaches and how not everybody is thinking about trying to have coherence to the entirety of their sound design, right? It's I need an explosion, I build an explosion, I put it in, or I need this gun, and I put it in. It's not how do I create a sonic world that works. And it's really, I think it's really great to hear that 14 years ago now, right? Like people like inspired somewhat by the technological limitations as well, right? But you're working, on trying to develop a coherent sonic space. Because I think we'd have better sounding games if more people thought that way. And so,
or more unique. I mean, I think the idea is that like you can like take a random clip of Thief, you know what I mean, and kind of recognize it as Thief, where it would be harder to take a random clip of.
I mean, I think some of the I think that a lot of games nowadays have awesome sound, and they're way more advanced, and they are really really good, and like. So once in a while, like something will remind me. I'll go and I'll go run through some of the old sound effects that if I just click on a wave, I'm like, oh my god, that is so terrible. How did I actually let that go into the game? But I think the thing that saves it is on a whole, there's this kind of thing that like makes them kind of fit together, and almost no sound in the entire game is very important, but hopefully they come together in some unique is good, because that I think unique is one of the most important things that we get to miss, right? We all as movies are like so sophisticated and stuff like that, everyone has this great composer writing this great music, and you know what, you can't help but they all start to sound the same, right? Even if it's really, really awesome, it sounds the same. And
they're all Hans Zimmer, right? Or somebody else.
Yeah. And games are kind of like, as in the last 10 years, all games are now orchestral things, and they go rent this orchestra and they do that. And it's really awesome.
And
the
it's
music
good. It is good.
Really getting good, but we're starting to suffer from the same things. There's not that much unique, So it's nice when you see Limbo come out, right? And it's okay, different approach. Not only does it catch your eye visually, but sonically, it's also wow, this is focused in some kind of way that makes you remember it.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have any other sense of games that you like for stuff like that, or stuff that's jumped out at you in the past 10 years, maybe? Or? Just out of curiosity.
The Half-Life games were awesome. They were kind of a pinnacle of that kind of stuff. And you know what? I have to admit that I don't play games very much anymore.
Oh, that's fine.
And so I'm not. I'll play some demos, and I will have friends, and I will watch them, play games like that. But I don't actually really play, a ton.
You did play Limbo, it sounds like.
I did play Limbo a little bit. I mean, not a lot. I didn't finish the game. I played Halo when it came out, and blah blah blah. And I played Silent Hill because that was kind of up my alley. I liked, this is going to be a good scary game. So.
You also did System Shock 2, is that correct? So how did that come about? Because I know that was like a joint Irrational. Irrational was just starting, and then that was... So you didn't do System Shock 1, that was Greg mostly. Correct?
Right, I did. Greg was the chief guy on System Shock 1. I mean, I helped doing some of the audio logs, and I helped do a lot of the localization logs, but I wasn't a sound designer or didn't write the music for that. I was...
But you did on 2. So you were
on 2, I was the guy,
Okay. So did you? So as opposed to the Thief series, where you were sort of, where you were the author of the sound experience of the game, you were kind of. Did you have a strong sense of trying to kind of begin where Greg had been in a certain way, or was it very more just kind of well, this is a different project?
No, we wanted to. It was funny. We wanted to keep. First of all, it was built on the Thief engine. It was using the drama. In fact, it was built in the Looking Glass Studios because Irrational was there, but they had moved into some offices right where we were, and they were sharing the same tech as I think as we were making Thief 2. I think they were making System Shock 2. So, and part of the deal with them. Being there was that they would use some of Looking Glass's folks, so they used some of our tech team to help keep on polishing up the engine, and maybe I don't remember if they used any artists or something, but they used Looking Glass's audio department. So, so we wanted to keep it like System Shock, but bring in some of the elements of that the drama engine did well, which is the whole a little bit of the stealth thing. Now System Shock's much more of an action game than Thief was, but I remember having one conversation that lasted about 20 seconds with Greg because he was kind of there, and we were thinking about whether we should re-envision Shodan's voice, or not. And so we were like, okay, so should we? This is a big part of System Shock 1. Should we kind of progress and change and try to figure out what the next evolution of how she should sound? And then I think we talked about it for 20 seconds, and we're like, no, fuck it, no, this has got to be the same. It was so cool the first way, we're going to try to do it exactly the same. So one of the things that we try to do a direct copy of is, when we did voice processing for System Shock 2, we tried to copy the same, we tried to make Shodan the same, exact voice in the first one because it was so cool.
So that's really interesting because when we talked to Greg, one of the things he talked a lot about was how hard it was to create the Shodan voice because he had to do all those stutters by hand because of the sound technology at the time. And I'm wondering, So for you, trying to recreate that same thing a few years later with different technology, I'm wondering how that process was.
It was exactly the same because I had done some of that on the French and German version on the first one. So I knew how the because they're right, they're all hand done, right? All and we back then we set them up. Back then we for the first System Shock, I think they used DEC, which is like an early 4-track, DAW basically, right? So. And so I kind of knew because I didn't do the English ones, but I did some of the French or German showdowns, where we had to cut up stuff, and because they all had to be done separately by hand too. So I kind of knew how it was done, and we actually did. It was exactly the same, I used Peak for System Shock 2 and Digital Performer, but it was exactly the same. Basically, you bring first we did some processing on the voice to get it into the kind of character, into the some distortion and some doubling to kind of make it sound like a mechanical voice, and then we would cut up and just try to listen through and find places we thought we would stutter it just by copy and pasting, and it was just a lot of okay, let's take this line and pitch it up a lot and stretch it out and do this and pitch it down, and maybe I had a second one that echoes what you said. The idea was basically. I like the idea that whenever she was talking about something that annoyed her, we'd let her spin off a little bit. So if she was talking about the intruder or something, she might go, she couldn't spit it out, and then it would come out in a burst. And then when she was talking about normal stuff, maybe she would calm down. So try to make it, but it was the same done by hand. In fact, I remember talking with Ken Levine, and because Ken Levine is an awesome writer, but he likes to write and rewrite, and so. We said, I'm not doing any of the showdown processing until the script is completely locked, because it took 2 to 4 hours per line to chop up and turn into.
How many lines total, do you think?
For the showdown voices, I don't know, 150 something.
And that's just showdown?
Just showdown, yeah. The other ones, the other logs, the logs that you hear just from the crew members, they had to be, put together also, but they were, not nearly as complicated. It was just basically, we batch convert all the things so that they have a certain tonal quality, and then for different crew members or different decks, we'd have different ambience that we put behind them, and some were really orchestrated, maybe in the log there's some firefight going on, so you'd have to do kind of almost an audio post to this fictionary movie, so those we could kind of do early on, but the showdown ones up until the last couple of weeks, all the showdown lines were just done. We're just my wife she recorded. So it was just her speaking, the parts normally. She can do that creepy. Hello, how are you doing?
Yeah, like the howl voice.
The female howl voice that seems just because there's something, and even there's something about, where the human cadence is slightly off, the pitch goes up maybe at some time where it shouldn't. So she can do that really well, have it.
So she is performing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She is, although all the stuttering and all the crazy stuff that happens is done after the fact, but it works a lot better because she knows how to just the dry read is creepy because it's slightly unnatural, because you can tell it's a computer speaking to you because they know all of the rules of language, but they don't have any of the connotations behind it, and so that the pacing and the timing is slightly different. So she can do that really well. So.
Yeah, I was going to ask you before, but it sounds I think you already answered it, which was what was the primary driving thing, concern for when you were doing the pitch ups and all this kind of stuff, and was it just what sounded cool, or was it about the character? And it sounds like it was largely about the character in a lot of ways. It sounds like you had a very strong sense of who Shodan was. This is a very clearly defined character.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't really that a strong sense, but not really that complex. It wasn't there was I couldn't write pages on it or anything like that. But but the general sense that this is someone who is not alive, but thinks they are all powerful and thinks they are in control, but really aren't. It's like some haywire. They're dealing with. It's almost like a computer dealing with being born, right? They have a lot of the infantile things that a baby has, right? Because they don't know, they don't have like the maturity, the judgment around the world. So
she throws fits.
And we look. So whenever her line had something that I thought she's probably annoyed at this or irked, or she's mentioning her nemesis, then we would try to doctor up her voice in a way that made her sound like she was losing it for a second, and then she pulled it back together because she's trying to be this perfect human. So it was all like I think that the one thing that we struggled with in System Shock 2, a lot of the Shodan lines were very instructional. They were actually the thing telling you what to do.
Because in System Shock 2, Shodan deceives you by pretending to be somebody else,
right.
and then is sort of like your guide. And
but even after she's revealed,
she's still your guide.
She's still your guide telling you to do this. So in System Shock 1, I remember listening to a lot of logs that were, a lot of them were like insulting, nice jump human, and things like that.
Oh my God, I remember that part of the
game. And so those were sinister just by what she was saying. I remember struggling with trying to make things sinister when it said, okay, go to deck 5 and press the yellow button, and the writing was, I don't mean to imply the writing was dry. It wasn't dry at all.
No,
However, but there was a lot of instructional stuff. You know, first you must do this, then you must do that. And that part was like, okay, I'm trying to find creative ways to keep her in character without her having flip out, about something stupid. So it was kind of tricky to try to keep the same intensity going when she's actually not yelling at you or calling you an insect.
And it sounds like the sound design otherwise for the game, because it was in Dromед and it was very Thief inspired. Was there more kind of focus on ambience in
well, we had
Shock 2?
The thing that was different is that we did have because this was more of an action game, we did have like a separate musical score from the ambience, and that you could turn off in the.
That was very different from Thief.
Yeah. Now a lot of the ambiences we did were still atmospheric, or not like non-realistic, hums and thrums and things like that. But because the world was also so much denser, we got a lot of
Then System Shock 1 or Thief?
Then Thief, excuse me.
Okay.
Meaning there's computers everywhere, there's buzzing lights, there's stuff. We had just a lot more stuff to
like technology in the world as opposed to Thief.
We would do we'd try to come up with some cool sounding little loop of bleeps and stuff that was kind of creepy and hook that. So you had a lot of that. So System Shock 2 did have a separate score. And I didn't actually write most of the music for System Shock 2. It was written mostly by Josh Randall, who I work with. He wrote most of the kind of faster techno style stuff, and by a guy who had just started at Looking Glass named Ramin Djawadi, who actually is now in Hollywood. He's done music for. I think he does music for the Game of Thrones HBO thing.
Oh wow!
And he worked with Hans Zimmer for a while, and is kind of working his way up the chain, and actually doing his own movies and stuff like that.
Oh wow! Cool.
And he did a lot of the kind of more slower, creepy music, and
more something you might more associate with horror. Kind of.
Yes, right. And so I did most of the. I contributed a few pieces of music on my own, but mostly I took their stuff and did some remixing and integrating into the game and laid them out into the levels, But we definitely treated it as a separate thing that you could turn off if you wanted to. So we had this thing where we were trying to make the ambiences. If you decided to turn the music off, we still wanted the ambiences to evoke enough atmosphere that you felt.
But you still can't turn off the ambience, is that correct?
You can't turn off the ambience in this
one,
no. But you could turn off the music like you can in most every other game,
Okay.
And then we had a lot of people who just loved the music. They thought it was really awesome because it actually is really cool. Yeah. But we had some purists who were like, "Oh no, it's getting in my way of my Thief style exploration," and I can kind of see both points. But
so it sounds because some fans were sort of encountering it because a lot of people didn't play System Shock 1, so some fans were encountering it as kind of an extension of what they knew from Thief, and some people were encountering it as a sequel to System Shock.
Exactly, yeah. And some of the people,
So it's kind of both, too, right?
It is.
It's kind of like a Thief offshoot and also like a System Shock sequel.
Yeah, I mean, right then, we were just coming off Thief 1, and we were like, we liked all of we thought that kind of like, wow, the fact that you can kind of hear what's going on and have those be cues, that's important. Why drop that for this game? We want that whole thing. Part of System Shock 2 is also sneaking around, and a lot of the AI for the guys who are your enemies very
the creatures
similar,
and mutants and robots and stuff.
Is very similar to Thief. So if you stand still, they won't notice you, and all the kind of same stuff that you could do in Thief, you could do in System Shock 2. That wasn't really the central part of the game. It's much more action oriented. So a lot of people didn't even realize that if you just shut up, the guys will probably walk right by you.
But it still works because it still works. It's still in the system.
Yeah,
it inherits a lot of that. One of the things I've been asking people is, I mean, obviously, and I mentioned before, working at Harmonix now, being famous for being a sound music oriented company. Is there anything? I don't know if the best way to even articulate this, but anything you learned or any of your experience or how you think about sound over the course of your career, like how does that transition in any way into what you do in Harmonix? Like, do you see that as connected with the stuff you were doing at Looking Glass, or do you see it as more of kind of a different thing?
The stuff at Harmonix is, quite a bit different. We're usually dealing with music-centric games, which means music is up front, and sound effects or atmosphere is less of a thing, right? And we're usually dealing with licensed music in most of our games, which means that we're not even like writing, evocative thing. It's about something different. So there are, I think there are a lot of differences, of course, but I mean, I think a lot of obviously, experience from doing the other kind of more traditional games, Thief and System Shock and stuff, of course, teaches you about all the other. I mean, we still have sound effects in our games, and it's just, but the approach is quite different. I think that it was quite different for me. And as soon as I kind of like came to Harmonix, I remember like, I miss kind of doing kind of sound in a 3D world and things like that, but soon dove into other stuff. We did a lot of, obviously with Harmonix, we do a lot of like transcribing and trying to turn this music into these kind of abstract, things that kind of try to represent the music as best we can even though they're not real transcriptions, and that was kind of a challenge and a good way of thinking about it. But I'm not sure how directly. I mean, other than the general experience of like kind of.
Well, I think maybe what I'm wondering is, I guess I'm struck by by maybe the culture of a company like Looking Glass, where you have these people who are musicians in positions of guidance, and is there? I guess I'm wondering, is there a similar vibe I mean, obviously there would be at Harmonix, and I'm just interested in sound being important, not being the last cog of the engine, is something that I would imagine is even more emphasized, probably more at Harmonix than probably almost any other company. But it does seem like that. I don't know if got started is the right word, but it definitely. I would imagine there's some carryover from the experience of a company like Looking Glass, where that was also extremely important.
Yes, I think that's true. I mean, we have. There are a number of people from Looking Glass who work at Harmonix, and a number and some of them. Are kind of musicians first. Even some of the coders are actually musicians first, and they go and they play in bands and stuff like and that. So yeah, I think you have this. There is this, certainly this mentality that that sound is never just the veneer the polish that we put on top at the very end.